Welcome to tutorial number 4 of this Beginner Max MSP series. In this tutorial, we're going to cover attributes. What are attributes? How are they different from arguments? What is the Attrui, or Attrui, as I called it in tutorial 0, like a dingus? The print object, object inspector, patcher inspector, and panel. So to start, let's open our blank max patch. After auto-completing an object name, so let's say print, and then you press space, you'll see that we have these two options here. We have arguments, 1, attributes, 1, which means that we only have one argument available for print, and we only have one attribute available for print. So the argument is the identifier, so we could name it Tiffany. We can name it anything. And what that means is that it will appear in the max window. We've already showed this. So if we send it a message of party, and we double click, we have the max window, party, object Tiffany likes to party. So that is what the argument is. Arguments are things that follow the print the print object name. Attributes, however, require a @ sign. But what are attributes here? I have a writing by David Ziccarelli. And who's David Ziccarelli? He is the person who owns Cycling 74. So the current commercial version of Max has since been distributed by Ziccarelli's company, Cycling 74, since 1999. So awesome. He's writing about attributes when they first came out in 2007. Sometimes when you are programming, you need to be able to configure some information about how your computer will do its job. Over the years, programmers have come up with a number of different terms for these little pieces of information: parameters, properties, fields, etc. In Max, we call them attributes. Attributes were first introduced in Jitter, where they make it convenient to manage the state of complex objects such as jit.qt.movie. So attributes are essentially arguments. They're a different kind of argument, and that's how you should think of them. Jitter users will be familiar with the fact that the initial value of an attribute can be set when typing arguments into an object box. Here's an example: at loop 2 at high quality 1. So that's what attributes look like, and it's funny because attributes, at sign. So that's a way to think about it. So if we one way of thinking about it is attributes are a way of further specifying either how an object looks or functions. Just like the object or the arguments specify the way an object functions, so do attributes, but they also have a lot to do with how the object appears. So the only available attribute for the print object is pop-up, and pop-up is initially at the state of 0. What does that mean? Well, it means that when we send it party, it just appears in the max window, and that's it. But if we change pop-up to 1, look at what happens. It shows us right here, so that we don't need to have the max window open with our print objects. Party, 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 party. You see, it's got that little bang next to it when we send it something. So the Attrui object is attribute user interface, ATTR-UI. So the Attrui object is use the Attrui object to inspect the attribute values of the objects it is connected to. So when it's not connected to anything, it doesn't do anything. I have it locked. We can't do anything with it. However, if we connect it to an object, then it inspects the attributes of that particular object. So print, pop-up when message received. So you can see, since we set it to be 1, then it has the checkbox, which means it'll show up. But notice how if we now uncheck the checkbox, it still says 1, but it doesn't do the pop-up. So it overwrites what you have written in the object box. So even though it still says 1, it doesn't mean that the pop-up's going to work. So that's cool that you have the ability to overwrite what you've written there. So, but wait, there's more. Even though this Attrui only shows the one attribute here, objects also have a lot more that you can access via the Object Inspector. So what is the Object Inspector? It's a way to inspect attributes. How to open the Object Inspector. First, select the object and press Command-I. And look at that. We have Print Inspector. So it's inspecting this object. And then notice how, if you select a different object, Message Inspector. So now we're inspecting that particular object. And then if we select nothing, it's a nothing inspector. You can't inspect anything. This is the Object Inspector. You have to inspect an object with it. So you can Command-I. Another way is go to Object and then press Inspector. That's what the Command-I does. Right there. Another way, right-click the object, go to Inspector. Bam. Another way, go to the object, go to the left, and we'll cover this later. If you go to the left of an object, look at that. You get this little wheel that gives you a bunch of other options. So if you go to Object, Inspector, bam. And then if you select an object and then open the sidebar right here, look at that. You got the Inspector. So because this sidebar is useful where you got the Explorer, the Inspector, and the Max window. The three things we've covered yet. We'll cover reference in the next video, actually. So notice how the Inspector is relevant to the object selected. So if we look at Tiffany, the print window of Tiffany within this Inspector window, you will see, let's move this over, give us some room. Oops. You will see a bunch of different options here. Now, a lot of the options within this Inspector window are the same across multiple objects. One of them is Hide Unlock. What does that mean? Well, notice also, something to note is that this is called the Clue window right here. I believe that, yeah, Clue window. So you have the option of having it appear as a separate box. I actually didn't realize that. But the Clue window will also appear down here, and it will explain what each attribute does as you roll over it. So it's very useful to keep that in mind. Hide Unlock makes it toggles whether an object is hidden when the patcher is locked. So if it's not selected, we lock it. It looks normal. I'm going to move this over. If it is selected, then when we lock our patcher, look, it turns into a ghost. It's completely disappeared. Patching rectangle shows the XY coordinates. So I'm not sure if it's pixels. It must be. So this is 42 pixels in from the left side, and then this is 301 pixels down from the top. So if we change this to 101, look at that. You can change it right there. Ignore click is not relevant to print, but let's say we take this party, and normally if you lock your patch and you press it, you are pressing the button. You can see it's party, 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 party. Meanwhile, though, if you go to the Inspector and you do ignore click, when you lock the patcher, you can't click it, you can't touch it. So that is useful, but not necessarily for the print. Pop up when message received. So you have this that you could access the pop-up through writing it in the object command. You could access it through the Adder UI, and you could also access it through the Inspector. Background color, so this is something that you can do on every object as well. Look at change that background color. Let's get it like a nice blue border, text color, make it white. Look at that. So you can do that with all of the objects, I believe, or most all of the objects. Background, border, text color, annotation, and hint. What is the difference between annotation and hint? So annotation is for the Clue window, and hint is what gets displayed when you hover over the object in lock mode. So if we want to do the annotation of Eddie Murphy, then the hint of party all the time, when you hover over a object, you will see that in the Clue window down here, you have Eddie Murphy. So also, if you go to, if you lock your patcher, I should not hide this anymore. If you lock your patcher, then when you hover over it, the hint shows up. So party all the time, party all the time. This is really good to do, not even if you are, it's really good to do if you're going to give away your patcher so that other people can use it, because then it helps them know what they're doing. on how to operate within the patch, but it's also good just to do for yourself, because then if you ever refer back to your patcher, you have instructions for yourself. You know, be kind to your future self. You also have options of changing the font. So of course I'm going to change to the delicious Comic Sans, and you can change font size. You can make it bold, and then text justification. So right now we got it left. You can center it. So you can really change the appearance of objects with the attributes. They're very important. So when you attach an Attrui UI, though, notice how only one of them shows up. So object to object, that depends on what you can change in the actual window. So Object Inspector's bottom buttons. So we have, at this Object Inspector here, you have these inspector buttons right here. So you have Modify Selected Item. So if you go to, you have Copy Attribute, which means, say you want this Attrui UI to have the same background color as this, or let's make the message box have the same background color as the print object. If you go to Modify, Copy Attribute, then so I had background color selected. You go to Party, select background color, and then you can just paste it. Paste Attribute. So Command V. Look at that. Now we got a red party over there too. So that's what one of these Modify Selected Items commands does. Set to default value. So if you make it, if you click this, then it will set it to what it normally is when you create things. So we could set the text back to the default. But then you also have revert value, which is basically the undo for when this inspector box was first opened. So since it was red when we first opened it, oh, well, background color is already gone. We must have already closed it. So since we just changed the text color, if we press revert, it'll go back. It'll do the undo. So we got show attribute names. So this will show the attributes you can change. Well, it will show the names of all the attributes, but only some of them you can change via the @ sign, like pop-up. So show attribute names. We have freeze attributes and unfreeze attributes. So first let me make this so you can see it. So when you change the color and whatnot, when we save our patch, it will automatically load this object with these colors. Colors are saved automatically. However, whenever there is an attribute that is in italics like this, it won't save your settings when you save your patcher and then open it again. So as an example here, and I have this open. So freezing attributes, the documentation for Cycling 74. Attributes, if the attribute name is printed in italics, its value is not saved with the patcher. Attributes of user interface objects, such as color and size, are always saved in the patcher. So if it's in italics, that means it won't be saved. So as an example of this, let's say that we want this to have a pop-up all the time. So we select pop-up, but then we save this as tut for test, and now close it out and reopen it. Tut for test. Notice how I still have the beautiful Comic Sans, and I still have the border color and everything, but pop-up is not selected anymore. So that's because it doesn't have the that's because it was written in italics and it doesn't save that. So in order to make sure we save that, we will have to freeze that attribute. And so if we select it, and then you go to the little snowflake here, store the current value. Actually, now that I know we have this clue window, let's get this open. Store the current value as the save value of the attribute, immune from any changes to the attribute's value. So we freeze it, and it gets blue because it's frozen. So then now, if we save it, we close, and we reopen. Look at that. Pop-up is saved. Hooray. So that's what freeze and then of course unfreeze does. If we don't want to keep that value anymore, we unfreeze it. Make attribute in patcher. So say we didn't have this attr UI, but we wanted one for pop-up when message received. Press make attribute, and there it goes, it appears. And then finally show object. So if we have an object selected, we have the inspector selected for an object, then we press show object, and it will highlight what object we are inspecting. So again, remember that when you're inspecting these, you're only inspecting one object at a time. Moving on, just like each object has its own inspector, so does your entire patcher. So what that means is if you press Command Shift I, now we have an inspector for TUT04 test. So this now will affect everything patcher wide. And I'm not going to go over all these, but one thing is like unlocked background color. So since we have it unlocked, we could change this background color. Look at that. Let's get a nice little soft green there. And then background color, which is when it's locked, we'll get it like purple. So now if we lock our patch, bam, we can get this purple. So patcher inspector is changing the attributes of the entire patcher. So you can Command Shift I, you can view patcher inspector like I just did, or you can right click on patcher in a blank spot and then just patcher inspector. So yep. And moving on. Now let's play with an object that has a lot of attributes. I'm going to introduce you to one last object in this video, and that is the panel object. So the panel object lets you create colored panels for use in creating user interfaces. The panel can be a variety of shapes, including circles, triangles, arrows, and rectangles with optional rounded corners. Shadows and gradients can also be used. I'm just going to fly through this actually because I've already spent a lot of time here. But so if you press space, you'll see this one has 14 attributes. It has no arguments because it's all for decoration purposes, but it has 14 attributes. So we can address each one of these attributes by typing at, and then, let's do arrow. No, well, not. Let's do shape, and then if we scroll over it, sets the shape of the panel. But instead of addressing the attributes through the @ sign, I'm instead going to create it. And then look at that. It creates this gray little boring gray box. So again, we can change the attributes by typing it in its initial state with the object here through the @ signs, or we could change it by the attr UI once we hook it up to it. That locked patch. So now these are all the 14 attributes we can change, or more. It looks like there's more than 14 in here. And then you can also change the attributes through the inspector window, which I'm going to do real quick. So quickly, you'll see you also have hide unlock, which we had from the last time, patching rectangle, ignore click. By default, ignore click is on with the panel window since it's decoration. You also have border size. So now if we click, you can double click and then type. Let's do 10. But you could also just click on it and drag it up and down. So that's nice. Set a border of 4. Shadow size, we'll make it so it's got this little edge to it. And so if you go positive, it looks like it's coming out. If you go negative, it looks like it's going in. But then again, it's all an optical illusion. Roundness of box corners. So since we have rectangle set, we can change the roundness of the box corners. And then filling mode, well, here, no, we got border color, which, as you could imagine, border. Interior color, so we'll make this blue. And then drag window. So drag window is something that, here, if we get the clue window open, when drag window is set to 1 and the patcher is locked, click dragging on the panel will drag the patcher window. So this could be useful for user interface purposes. So now if we select this, oh, look at that, it got rid of the ignore click. So if you select this, I was going to say you have to get rid of the ignore click, because if you have ignore click and drag window on, nothing happens. I have it locked, I'm dragging, nothing happens. But if you get rid of ignore click Now look at that. By clicking on the panel, you can move your entire patch. So this is really nice for, giving specific details to your patchers that you want to have people interact with. It's a way to further the user interface interaction. So filling mode, another thing we have is filling mode. Right now it's set to color. And watch when we change color, it will change the gradients here and the interior color. Look at, bam. Now shadow size has disappeared, and we have this nice smooth little gradient here. So you can change the gradient to red to gray. Look at that. And you can also change the gradient angle. So you can click and drag up again, but it goes in a very small amount. But you can see how it's slowly changing. So now it's going from top to bottom, or rather bottom to top. And we can type 180. Look at that. It changes the side of the gradient, so you can do that. Shape. So we have rectangle selected still, but if you go to circle, now we make a circle, triangle. And notice when we select triangle, we got this horizontal direction and vertical direction. So if we want it left to right, if we want it right to left. Now if we vertical direction, if we want it centered, left to right, now we got a playhead, bottom to top. And then if you go to arrow, now we have an arrow. How cool. So we have arrow orientation selected now. Right to left, or left to right, right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top. Cool. And all of these can be accessed through the Adder UI. So not only that, but so if we select shape, you'll notice that arrow is 3. So if I lock the patch, rectangle is 0, circle is 1, and triangle is 2. So if we have this Adder UI hooked up and the shape attribute is selected, and we make it a series of messages. Let's make one message 0, one message 1, and one message 2. And now I'm going to hold down Shift, and then I'm going to click, and look at that. You don't have to click and hold. And then if you hold down Shift and you keep holding down Shift, now you can attach it to multiple things. So then I'm going to let go of Shift, and I'll click it, and then there we go. So if we lock our patcher, now we could change it to rectangle, to circle, to triangle. So we can send Adder UI's values and change the attributes through the Adder UI. Cool. The last thing I want to mention is the bring to front and send to back. So the Max objects all behave just like Photoshop does with layers. So since this was created later than this panel, and let's change these so you can just tell a difference. Since this was created later, it's on top of it. But if you wanted to send it underneath, you got send to back. Beautiful. And then send to front, or bring to front. Cool. And then that's how it'll work, so you can make it look nice and clean. So that's it for tutorial number 4. I hope you've learned a lot about attributes. They are a main part of Max MSP, so cool. I look forward to partying with you in the next video.